Down for questions. Sir. The microphone. Yeah.
Is there, according to your knowledge, any other national drug or health organization which is comparable to what you have demonstrated us now?
I think throughout the world, it seems to be not on right now. Maybe I should use the other phone, or it's coming back.
Perhaps I should add that I'm an old medical doctor specialized in internal medicine with a diploma from Switzerland. That's my basis. I know what's going on in our capital, Bern, with regard to questions you discussed.
I think there is a global recognition of the importance to close the circle of stakeholders and have the opportunity to engage. This gives some feedback, so let me switch this off because we are probably using the other phones here. Maybe that works, yeah. I think many organizations have realized that this is a strategic opportunity. There are different forms, and currently I think we have the privilege to observe from different angles how different experiments are conducted to bring this critical mass together and also enable everyone in our society, particularly patients, to voice their interests. We just need to build iteratively functional platforms, how they also can voice their choice and make it stick. And certainly engagement with academic centers, public-private partnerships, patient organizations who then engage into the scientific process, but also in the process of policy making, evidence generation, and perhaps the political pressure that, or the support for politicians who understand that are very critical. So I think it's very fascinating. There are very interesting times, and we want to figure out what are the best options. And I wouldn't recommend or state that one way or one way of doing is the only way of doing it. I think there are different opportunities and a number of varieties and flavors that can accomplish that. So that's what I would say in that context.
Beate, the question.
Well, it's a bit difficult for me. I had a bit of different expectation out of this. I mean, when I introduced that, we said, is there a precautionary principle in the same sense for usual drugs and at the same time for nano drugs, or is it not? When you read the newspapers, just what we recently read in Neue Zürcher Zeitung is that, for instance, Big Pharma is using as a platform for trials basically India and other countries where you do enormous amount of trial, and that is seemingly after you have done these trials, you go into the patient, and then from the patient, if you see effects that are severe, you correct. And when you deal with regulatory matters and nanomedicine, you get the impression that things do not accelerate, but they get slower and slower and slower. The next point is that if you, at the moment that the European Union seek to have a project that at a certain point you have to make sure that not the European Commission or the project that is granted takes responsibility for the toxicity. There is like a hype on that we say never, 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 it can be toxic. And I ask myself all the time, how would you, as regulator, to take a sentence that Werner said last year, how would you ever then transpose to nanomedicine, make a heart valve if you wouldn't take a huge risk?
Yeah, I think to your point.
Or the other point, what just Jean-Marie said today about crossing the road, and in the end, he said to about 5 people, he said, that's not the question, we asked the wrong question. You have to take the question that you say if one person dies, you will read it next day in the newspaper in an accident. But actually you should every day write 70,000 mastered to cross the road without getting killed. And this is a bit something which I would have expected that we speak more about, the difference between traditional drugs and nanomedicine and regulations.
Yeah, I think we still have a little bit of time to address that, but I think you bring up a point, whether it's called nanotechnology or other emerging new science and technology versus the very traditional approach to do pharmaceutical development. I think, of course, innovation often is driven by smaller entities, startup companies, spin-outs from academic institutions and research entities to develop new technologies and take relatively higher risk, which in turn also means that most of the time, at least in the initial phases, the resources that large pharma has at their hands, as you mentioned, having essentially a global access to trial sites, as you used this example, that's often not the case for smaller entities. And I think there's the first distinction between emerging technologies and emerging science, which nano in many ways is included in, because it is not something that we have let's say, decades of experience with, particularly not in particular areas. So that's probably an element that goes into it. I don't think that it is, from a process point of view, designed to disadvantage emerging technologies. In fact, the agency, as I hope was able to illustrate, is very aware of the disadvantage of new technology going through the development process, and the uncertainty often leads to delays in the decision making because the information, the science is missing. What we are proposing, therefore, is to speed up and optimize the process in which we gain new critical scientific information. And one of the ways to do it is collaboratively, and the second way is to make all stakeholders, including investors, aware that their investment in this area is critical to drive the innovation forward. Because the regulatory hurdles are two main things traditionally. It is to get approval to the market, where it's not necessarily that the law of FDA prohibits that. It's the missing information in order to meet the approval criteria, which include safety, quality, and effectiveness. And as such, it is a challenge and a question of the dialogue how to mitigate this lack of knowledge and engage into specifically targeted science and research to do this, so that all the stakeholders are on the same page, at least about the scientific facts.
I want to add a few comments, because you asked a few things. I think first, you mentioned India, Eastern Europe, Russia, and there is some controversy about that recently, about failed trials, because I think you have to make a difference between, I would say, a more conventional disease. Say, if you want to develop a new antihypertensive, you have to go there. But I think that's different in rare and serious diseases. I think we recruit all our patients today in the US. For rare and serious diseases, there are patients available. You don't have to go elsewhere. They are eager to test new technologies. And I don't see any difference between nanotechnology or some other novel technology. And what I said before is, in our experience, the division at FDA we work with is extremely open and extremely collaborative on that. But they will not give you any, they cannot give you any present, right? I mean, they still have to make sure it's safe and effective. So I think we should not necessarily single out nanotechnology as a novel technology. I think they're very open to that. There was a question there.
Yeah, regarding the FDA, you did not say anything about drastic changes that are expected because there's a new president who talks about cutting all agencies by 20% or 30%. Do you expect any big changes to the FDA? You said you have 20,000 employees. How many employees would be there if the new president gets his way? I mean, he did not get his way this year with the NIH. The NIH budget has increased despite the fact that he wants to cut it 20%. But what happens next year and what happens in the future? What are your expectations?
Maybe I start out with a quote from Yogi Berra, who stated that predictions are always very difficult, particularly when they're about the future. I must state that my personal opinion is that I do not believe that the agency will see a drastic reduction because number one, the current candidate for the commissioner's job, Scott Gottlieb, has spent time at the agency, so he has scientific and medical understanding of the challenges and also the opportunity. And he has perhaps stated in the pre-field of being considered as a candidate some good and important observations, which include the Hatch-Waxman Act for generic products, and believes that it needs to be a revision in the focus and perhaps some more detailed definition, because when the Waxman-Hatch regs were implemented, the technology and also the challenges in the generic product applications and market was very different. Today's products are more complicated. So we need to perhaps pay attention to the risk assessment and risk benefit. We also need to pay attention to process and process development and the quality in the process. Because if we let profit alone drive for the cheapest product to outcompete others, I think we'll suffer quality, and that's not in the best interest of, I guess, anyone, because we can be honest that at some point all of us will be a patient, and that's not to our benefit. So in general, I'm not as worried as some of my colleagues perhaps, or some parts in our society. I think reason will succeed. I also think that Republicans and Democrats across the aisles will work together and solve problems, particularly on the operational level. And we'll see what the next fiscal year budget brings. So that's something I cannot foresee. But I think there is consideration for the significant challenge that we have in our mission statement and our responsibility not only for the health of the public, which is really critical because the state of the nation is only as good as the health of the nation. I think we also have a significant impact on the ecosystem of the nation because we regulate about a quarter of any consumer dollar spent. So there will be some attention paid to the impact of premature sentiments to change the agency and the regulation. On top of it, it's not in anyone's interest to create a lot of uncertainty. So I would state that we will continue to be mindful, use risk-benefit considerations, use the key criteria for product approval, But you know, as I started saying, one of the hurdles is the regulatory approval. The second hurdle is actually the reimbursement for a successful product, and that's something FDA hardly influences. And yet there is a way to do that, namely through collaborative science, also epidemiological science, particularly with key insurers such as the Central Medical Services, Medicare, Medicaid, the VA hospital system, and other insurers. So I think we have big data. Right now we are still in the culture of data hoarding and not data sharing, unfortunately, but this has to be overcome, because if we don't, we'll all suffer from it. So that's
one more question,
as much as I would like to state.
One more question.
I also wanted to bring the topic to the differences between the conventional drugs and the nanomedicine. I don't think that is really maybe a big difference in the safety, but maybe what we could have is a missed opportunity, because we believe that nanomedicines could be very precise and could be dosed in amounts that they are very small compared to the conventional medicines. And the criteria that we are using is still to have the overall registration that can be the safety and the efficacy, they are still the same. An example that I will like to show is in type 1 diabetes. You need to have an endpoint, and I think it's both in the European Medical Agency and as well as in the FDA, that is the levels of the C-peptide. And this has to be followed for more than 1 year. So actually, the trials will be 1 year, and then a follow-up of 3 or 4. The point is, could we use maybe the so-called exploratory biomarkers that they are not accepted by the, not accepted, they are not officially named by the agencies as kind of endpoint to maybe accelerate these new medicines that have new opportunities for the patients?
May I do that, Frank? And we're not going to defend you. I think it's up to us here in the room, all of us that does discovery, that does clinical trials, that do novel work, to generate the scientific data and take that to regulators anywhere and show that whatever we do is relevant. And if we do that, I'm sure that regulators will be the first ones to adopt that and to work with us. I have examples. I worked through that for the last 30 years. And I think sometimes we have to turn again towards ourselves and say, we have to take that courage to pass the road. But if you want to be successful, we have to convince them. And it's up to us to do it. Without the work, it will not happen. There was more. I think we have one more, and then we have to stop. A very short one and a very short answer.
I actually wanted to make a comment about the culture, because if you think how fast other industries are developing, our industry is extremely behind. And I completely understand. I think it is part of the culture of the big pharma, but also the smaller pharma. We are doing everything too complicated. We are not taking advantage of the information technology and many other technological advances. Frank pointed out, and you pointed out with the culture, but it's not only in the big pharma, which is loaded with money, but also a little bit with the small pharma. So I think that what would expedite our mission to develop new drugs, to take more advantage of the technology and change the culture.
I think we all agree. Yes. I think we have to close here. I think we are all still available, especially Frank. So yes. Any further questions, I think we can do during the coffee break. Thanks so much.